Syria is one of the oldest and most culturally rich civilizations in the world. Yet today, this same land is caught in the grip of one of the worst civil wars in history. When the name Syria comes up, most people immediately think of conflict, refugees, and unrest. But have you ever stopped to consider how Syria reached this point? The truth is, the force driving Syria's downfall is not simply politics or dictatorship, but something it can never change: its geography. Indeed, Syria's geography is its greatest weight to bear, because both its destiny and its future are tied to it. No matter who governs Syria, these geographic challenges will always remain, pulling the country toward instability. So let's explore how its mountains, deserts, rivers, and borders have continually dragged Syria into endless wars. We put a lot of effort into making these videos. They take not only time, but also considerable resources. That's why we ask you to subscribe and share our work as much as possible so that we can keep reaching more people and never be forced to compromise on quality. Before we can fully understand Syria's present crisis, we need to look at where it sits on the map. Syria lies right in the heart of the Middle East and shares borders with 5 countries: Turkey, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel. This makes it a crossroads linking Europe, Asia, and Africa. Whoever held control over Syria also controlled key global trade routes, military movements, and the meeting point of civilizations. But while this location gave Syria immense importance, it also made it extremely vulnerable. Throughout history, countless great empires rose and fell here, all vying to claim this land. The Persians were the first to recognize the value of this region. Then came the Greeks under Alexander the Great, who established it as a central base. After them, the Romans took over, building roads and cities to cement their rule. Later, the territory passed to the Islamic Caliphate, the Crusaders, the Mongols, and eventually the Ottoman Empire. The reality is that Syria has never been a truly unified country. Nature itself divided the land into separate regions that were never fully connected to each other. If you examine Syria's map closely, you'll see that along its western edge, bordering the Mediterranean Sea, there are mountain ranges. These are more than just scenic landscapes. They have shaped the nation's history. The coastal Alawite hills formed a natural barrier. On one side, small villages along the coastline became home to the Alawite community. Cut off from the rest of Syria by these mountains, they developed their own unique identity, culture, and way of life. On the other side of the mountains in Syria's central region lived Sunni Muslims. Major cities such as Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and Damascus were built here on fertile plains and key trade routes. This allowed these cities to grow wealthy and advance through commerce and their strong connections with the wider Arab world. Yet, despite being part of the same country, the mountains kept them isolated from the coastal Alawites. There was little contact, no close bonds, and no real shared identity between them. As a result, the coastal areas remained under Shia Alawite influence, while the Central Plains had a Sunni majority. It was like having 2 neighbors living side by side, but separated by a solid wall, close in distance yet far apart socially and culturally. Over time, this distance bred mistrust, misunderstandings, and suspicion. Each group viewed the other as different and sometimes as a potential threat. But Syria's troubles didn't end with its mountains. Another major challenge was its water. In the Middle East, water is not just a resource, it is a lifeline. Most Syrians rely heavily on a single river, the Euphrates, particularly those living in the country's eastern and northern regions. But the challenge is that this vital river doesn't begin in Syria at all. Its source is in Turkey, which means Turkey controls how much water flows into Syria. This gives Turkey enormous power over Syria's farming, food supply, and way of life. For decades, the Euphrates has been a source of friction between the 2 nations. When Turkey constructed massive dams along the river to generate electricity and irrigate its own fields, the amount of water reaching Syria dropped sharply. The result was devastating. Syrian farmlands began to wither, and many families struggled to put food on the table. This deepened resentment toward Turkey and further strained diplomatic ties. Then, in 2006, Syria was hit by a severe drought. Rainfall disappeared, fields cracked and dried, and crops failed entirely. The drought dragged on for 5 years, impacting millions of farmers. Faced with hunger and crushing poverty, many abandoned their villages and migrated to cities such as Damascus, Aleppo, and Homs. This mass migration overwhelmed urban centers almost overnight. With so many people seeking food, jobs, and shelter, the cities simply couldn't cope. Services collapsed under the pressure, unemployment rose sharply, and public frustration grew. This displacement triggered a major social crisis. Anger simmered for years until it erupted in 2011 in the form of widespread protests. Protests that marked the beginning of Syria's ongoing civil war. Another factor that worsened Syria's plight is its vast eastern region, which is almost entirely desert. This barren land makes up more than half the country, isolating eastern cities like Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, and Palmyra from the western and coastal regions. Crossing this desert is expensive and logistically challenging, making Syria feel like it is split into two separate worlds. Over generations, the people in these desert regions developed distinct cultures and identities. Because their areas received little to no investment or infrastructure from the central government in Damascus, resentment towards state authorities grew. When the civil war erupted in 2011, the Syrian desert quickly turned into a hub of violence. Its remoteness and lack of government control made it an easy stronghold for armed groups like ISIS. They capitalized on local anger, recruiting disillusioned young men, setting up operational bases, and providing them with military training. From there, they launched attacks on other cities. Fighting these militants in such a vast, unforgiving terrain proved incredibly difficult. For Damascus, maintaining authority over this region became nearly impossible, and gradually it descended into chaos and destruction. But Syria's problems do not stem solely from its natural geography. Some were man-made. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire following World War I, Britain and France divided the Middle East according to their own interests, without considering local realities. They drew borders on maps with no regard for the ethnic, religious, or linguistic groups living there. As a result, diverse communities such as Sunnis, Alawites, Kurds, Druze, and Christians, with different histories and beliefs, were forced together within the same borders. Some groups were split into separate countries, while others were lumped together in one. It was like forcing two hostile neighbors to share a tiny house. These artificial borders created not only political problems, but also reawakened ancient ethnic and religious rivalries. Syria became a patchwork nation where Sunnis, Alawites, Kurds, Druze, and Christians lived side by side, each with its own traditions, customs, and systems. These differences often became flashpoints for conflict. On the map, Syria's divisions are clear. In the west, especially in the coastal Latakia region, live the Alawites, a small minority but the ruling elite since 1970. Latakia served as their power base, producing many of Syria's military and political leaders. The Assad family's authority was rooted in this coastal stronghold, but in December 2024, the situation shifted dramatically. The Syrian capital, Damascus, fell to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Turkish-backed forces. President Bashar al-Assad and his family fled to Russia, bringing an end to their 50-year rule and to the long-running civil war. In the country's central and southern regions, cities like Damascus, Homs, Hama, and Dara, Sunnis form the majority. Roughly 70% of Syrians are Sunni Muslims. Despite being the dominant demographic, they were marginalized for decades by the Alawite-led government. The protests that sparked in 2011 began in these Sunni-majority areas. Moving further northeast in places such as Qamishli, Hasaka, and Raqqa, the majority population is Kurdish. The Kurdish population in Syria has long sought recognition of their own identity and the right to self-determination, yet successive central governments have repeatedly suppressed them. This region holds immense strategic value because it is rich in both oil and fertile farmland. During the civil war, the Kurds managed to maintain control over this territory. In the southwest, near the borders with Israel and Jordan, lies the province of As-Suwaida, home to the Druze community. This is a small group that largely stayed neutral during the conflict, focusing primarily on protecting its own land. Then there is Syria's Christian population, living in areas such as Aleppo, Damascus, and smaller towns in the western part of the country. Their situation was particularly complicated as they found themselves caught between government forces and rebel factions. Many Christians aligned themselves with the Assad regime out of fear that extremist groups like ISIS might gain control, something they believed would be disastrous for them. In a country where each region is home to a completely different community, holding the nation together is a formidable challenge. But these internal divisions are only part of the problem. Syria's location and geography have also made it a battlefield for global powers. During the civil war, foreign countries exploited Syria's fragmented society to push their own agendas by backing different sides. Russia supported Bashar al-Assad because it saw a strategic opportunity. Maintaining Assad's rule allowed Russia to protect its naval base at Tartus on the Mediterranean Sea. This base is crucial for Russia since it grants access to global trade routes, unlike its northern ports, which are blocked by ice in winter. Supporting Assad also gave Moscow greater influence in the Middle East and showcased its status as a major power. Iran, too, threw its full weight behind Assad, driven by both strategic and religious motives. Assad's leadership was dominated by Alawites, a sect related to Shia Islam, which made him a natural ally for Shia-majority Iran in a region largely populated by Sunni states. On the other side, the United States, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia backed various rebel factions with the shared aim of bringing Assad down. Washington's priority was to defeat ISIS and remove a leader it viewed as a dictator. Turkey had two main goals: to expand its influence in Syria and to prevent Syrian Kurds from becoming too strong, fearing they might unite with Turkey's own Kurdish population and demand independence. Saudi Arabia's involvement was primarily religious, seeking to diminish the reach of Shia powers like Iran in the Middle East. The involvement of so many outside powers turned the conflict into something far more complex. It stopped being just a fight between the Syrian government and rebels, and became a proxy war where both global and regional powers competed for influence. Russia, Iran, the United States, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia all pursued their own strategic interests, leaving the Syrian people trapped in the middle. Millions lost their homes, their loved ones, and their futures. Entire cities, Aleppo, Homs, Raqqa, were reduced to rubble. The Syrian economy collapsed almost entirely. The GDP shrank to less than half of what it had been before the war. Inflation skyrocketed to the point where everyday staples like bread, rice, and cooking oil became unaffordable for the average citizen. Unemployment spread everywhere, schools shut down, hospitals lay in ruins, and an entire generation of children grew up knowing only violence and chaos. More than half the country's population was displaced. Some fled to nearby countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, while others made the dangerous journey to Europe. This mass refugee crisis created new political challenges in host countries. In Europe, the arrival of millions of Syrians fueled debates over immigration, national identity, and security. In Lebanon and Jordan, the number of refugees was so high compared to the local population that it placed overwhelming pressure on resources, often sparking tensions between residents and newcomers. In Turkey, millions of Syrians have now settled permanently, but many locals see them as a strain on the economy. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's clear that Syria's catastrophe is not the result of a single cause. It's the product of geography, history, ethnic fragmentation, and outside interference. Its mountains, deserts, and rivers physically separated its people. Artificial borders forced different groups to coexist without unity. Its position on the map made it a target for powerful nations. On top of that, droughts, disputes over water, and a lack of resources poured fuel on an already raging fire. Even though the war has ended, the damage runs so deep that recovery could take generations. Ironically, the very geography that has been Syria's greatest curse could also have been its greatest blessing. Its location, heritage, and culture had the potential to make it one of the most prosperous and stable nations in the Middle East. But achieving that would have required strong institutions, fair governance, and genuine cooperation between its diverse communities. Over the past century, these foundations were never built, and without them, even the most advantageous geography can turn into a trap. Syria's story stands as a cautionary tale for the world. Ignoring geography and history when shaping political decisions can lead to disaster. When communities with no trust or shared vision are forced together, it takes only a small spark to ignite a devastating conflict. The civil war may be over, but the road ahead is long and uncertain. Rebuilding cities, restoring public trust, creating livelihoods, and bringing millions of refugees home will demand time, resources, and patience. Perhaps the hardest task will be forging a shared national identity that all Syrians, whether Sunni, Alawite, Kurd, Druze, or Christian, can embrace. Only then can Syria's geography stop being a curse and start becoming a source of strength. Until that day comes, Syria will remain at risk of internal discord and foreign meddling. And when we look at Syria's map, we are not just seeing mountains, rivers, and borders. We are seeing the very roots of a century-long struggle.